Hello, everyone. My name is Maddie, and welcome to The Bridge. The Bridge is the place of all connection. It's the place where we meet each other when we're going from one place to another place. And there are many things in life that serve as bridges, things that connect us, that bring us closer together. And I think one is the acknowledgement that each of us is human and each of us has a story to tell. So that's the idea behind this podcast. The Bridge is to be a place of connection, less division, more connection. And so to start, I'm going to be sharing my story today. And then in the future, I'll be sharing other people's stories. Well, giving other people a platform to share their stories is the idea. So, what qualifies me? What makes me a good guide across the metaphorical bridge? Well, I am a woman who lived as a man for 5 years of my life. So, I went through the experience of living as being transgender to come through the experience on the other side, having found love and acceptance for myself as a woman. So I'm here to tell that tale, which is longer than I realized because I tried to do this yesterday and it was hard. It was hard to tell the story fully. I also realized that today is Detransition Awareness Day, which I had no idea. And I guess maybe that's a good place to start is this experience that I've gone through. It's commonly known as detransition, meaning that I'm someone who decided to transition, in my case, from female to male. And then I decided to stop and go back. And it took me a long time to find acceptance of that word as something that describes my experience, because when I was living as trans, I felt a lot of negativity around that word. So I avoided it for a little bit of time until I came into acceptance of it, and I began to look up other people's stories, and I was like, wow, we all have a lot in common, you know? So, um, and there's something I still don't quite like about it because, I do feel that we're always changing, we're always going forward, we're never really going back. So, I'm continuing onwards in my own personal evolution. And yes, also, I went back to self. I went back to self acceptance. And the story that I have to tell is how I got here. So, let's see. So, yeah, I guess we'll start. We'll start, with childhood is a good place to start. I was born a girl, and I feel I was born to be a very creative being, and I still am today, although I repressed it for some time. But I have always been someone who just loves to express. I love to make art. I love to dance. I love to express myself through clothing, through speech, through sound, through music, all these things. And the world that we live in was just too confining for the expansiveness of who I felt I was, especially growing up as a girl. I felt a lot of limitations around that. I felt it put me into a box, even though I loved being a girl. I always did. But I became aware of the differences between girls and boys and the different rules that we had from a pretty young age. One distinct memory, I was like maybe 3 years old. I was in the park with my parents and my two brothers, and my brothers took their shirts off while they were playing frisbee, and I asked my mom if I could do the same, and she said no. And at 3 years old, it's too young to even explain to a child really why that is. Um, but I felt it, and I felt it to be unfair. Later, when I was about 7 or 8 or so, my brothers played baseball, and I wanted to play baseball. And my parents said, no, only boys can play baseball, but you can play softball. And me being the stubborn, fiery child that I was, I said, no, I only want to play baseball. So therefore, I played neither. Um, so, anyways, I just felt these sort of limitations around me, around who I really was inside. So, I grew up with 4 siblings. Well, I'm one of 5. I'm the second oldest. I'm the oldest girl in my family, the oldest daughter, which came with a lot of responsibilities. So I have 3 younger siblings. One is 10 years younger than me, so I helped to really take care of her a lot when she was born. And we moved around a lot when I was a kid. I was born in Virginia. We lived in Kentucky, Virginia again, Pennsylvania. And in many ways, I had a really good childhood. I was well taken care of, comfortable physically, had my needs met. At the same time, my emotional needs were not met to the same extent, and I had a lot of emotional needs as a child. I was very sensitive, very emotional. I cried all the time, and my parents didn't really know what to do about that. They did the best that they could, but um, it did leave an impact on me and their inability to really care for me the ways that I needed when I was a child. And to be honest, I think that is kind of the common thread. Even though I was loved, I did not receive the love that I needed to thrive, or perhaps receive the love in the way that I needed to receive it, to really know it, to feel it. And the way that I needed to receive that love was to be seen and acknowledged for who I was, for who I am. And instead, it felt my whole life like who I was a problem. And through various experiences, I did begin to associate at least parts of that with my being female. It wasn't only my parents, but it was other things that happened. There were some major instances in my life of abuse and neglect, things like that, that really impacted me. So by the time that I was about 11 years old, I became depressed. I was really, really not well. Not only was I beginning to develop depression, I also was developing physical issues. I started to experience basically just like a constant fatigue and a sort of brain fog. So I felt just dizzy and confused a lot of the time. And that was when my youngest sister was very young, and I would take care of her a lot. I would take her to the playground, and I remember just feeling like so out of it and unable to play. And it was confusing because I was still a child, and yet I felt the burden of a life on my shoulders in this way, and felt incapable of handling that. I didn't know who to talk to, and I felt very much alone for a lot of my childhood and all throughout my teenage years, and honestly, really until the past few years have I begun to really find community and find love and find support. And a lot of that began with finding love within, of course. So, another key component I would say was I was raised Catholic, and I really didn't super resonate with being Catholic, mostly because I felt that the church was very hypocritical. I remember being in Sunday school as a child and loving this knowing that I felt about who God was. And then as I got older, the teachings seemed to change and seemed to be more, I don't know, judgmental, convoluted, less straying from the message of this pure and all accepting love that I knew God to be. Um, and so by the time I was 13, which was when I was supposed to make my confirmation in the church, I decided I wasn't going to do it. And that was kind of one of the first instances where I really butted heads with my parents, where I took a stand for myself and said, I'm not going to do this. Because at that point, it was not typical for kids to stand up for themselves in that way. Everyone else in my Sunday school class, they went ahead with it, even if they had doubts or if they had questions. But I said no, I wasn't going to do it, and I didn't do it. But it caused a big rift between me and my dad, especially. My mom, my mom and I really had a challenging relationship. I think the key component being that she was completely emotionally unavailable. I feel because of trauma that had happened in her life when she was growing up. And that's also why I basically became like a mother to my youngest sister. I feel that I parented her in a lot of ways because my mother was not really available to do so. So a lot of my pain and my hurt came from not being seen for who I was, not being loved for who I was from my parents, because a key part of who I am is that I stand up for what I believe in. And to be rejected for that, for my taking a stand at such a young age, something that actually is something I'm still proud of, for being someone who thinks for myself, to be rejected for that by my dad was very painful, very hurtful. But it just, life went on. We actually didn't really speak for a year or so. We just moved around each other in the house, and my dad would travel a lot. Sometimes he lived in other cities for work and would just come home on the weekends or things like that. So it felt in a way that he wasn't super present. And my mom was there, raising 5 kids, and she was a stay-at-home mom, but she also wasn't there. Couldn't really talk to her about anything. So, yeah. So as I said, I began to struggle by the time I was 11. By the time I was actually a teenager, I was deeply struggling. I was very depressed, very sad inside, and I didn't know why. I couldn't understand it. Now I believe that it's because, in addition to what was already the sort of ongoing lack of support, was coupled with some major traumatic events that happened in my life, that I also didn't get support for. So that's what I believe happened around that age. By the time I was in middle school, I already was beginning to explore concepts of identity and sexuality. I thought that I was gay, or at least bisexual, because I loved my girlfriends, and even though I actually, I feel like I was a bit of a late bloomer in that, I was just very innocent as a child. I didn't really experience what other people might have already been experiencing at that point regarding sexuality, sexual attraction. So I loved my friends who were girls, and then I was receiving these messages that maybe if I loved my friends and thought they were pretty, that actually I was attracted to them, and that actually that said something about me. So, it scared me to think that, but I allowed myself to explore it. So I did, and by the time I was in 10th grade, I was, sort of publicly telling friends that I was uh, pansexual, I think is what I said initially at school. I was in the Gay Straight Alliance. And yeah, I began to explore my masculinity a little bit. I would wear bow ties to school. I made my own bow ties. I've always loved to sew and make clothing, so I would make my own bow ties and wear them to school with a button down skirt. But I love to do sort of match situation. So I'd wear like a button down and a tie with a skirt and like high heeled boots or something like that. Um, I've always been very creative. I did the school musicals. I was in color guard. I was the captain of the color guard by my senior year of high school. I was living in Pennsylvania at this time. Um, so even though I was struggling, definitely deeply inside, very much so, a lot of times, I mean, I was just exhausted all the time. I would come home from school and just fall asleep, cry, felt so deeply alone. At the same time, I would have huge bursts of energy. I would spend all day in my mom had a room with her sewing machine. I would spend like 12 hours at a time. If I got stuck in like got into a project, I would just spend all my time in there listening to soundtracks from musicals and making stuff. And that was, you know, where I felt most me, most like Maddie, who I am, you know. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't like school very much. I liked my friends, you know, and I did like to learn. I liked certain classes, but because of the health issues I was experiencing, I would fall asleep in a lot of my classes. And again, I didn't have anyone to talk to. I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know how to explain this to anybody. My mom didn't believe in mental health. So even though I became aware that there was therapy out there, I did not have access to it. Um, I would confide in a couple close a couple teachers that I found that I really loved. There was a librarian who really helped me at my local library. Um, thank you to all the teachers and to all the friends that have ever helped me in my life when I was struggling. Um, I feel really that those people were like angels, you know, sent to guide me along my path and just remind me that there was hope, even though what was the hardest part about it is that even if I found someone I could confide in, there was nothing that they could do to help. Because as a minor, as a child, my parents had ultimate, you know, say over what I did. So by the time I was a teenager, I was just counting down the days until I could be 18 and be free. Or that's when I perceived that I would be free anyways. So, and what was also brewing inside of me was a deep, deep anger towards my parents. Um, for To be honest, part of me feels that there is stuff that I still don't know about because that anger, as you'll see once I talk about where that anger led me and what it led me to do to myself, it feels inexplainable. But I know that there were things that happened that caused me to feel that anger. On top of the ongoing, as I said, not feeling seen and loved for who I was inherently in my soul, which is something that I needed. So, an anger was brewing inside of me. So, when I was in high school, my junior year, I started a gay straight alliance at my local library, and me and my best friend, we ran it. It was every Wednesday after school. We would gather with a group of misfit teenagers who we all felt lost in the world, and we had found some sort of comfort and solace in each other and in um, finding love and acceptance for our differences through the queer identity. So, queer was the one word that I always resonated with from the beginning to the end. I no longer identify as queer, but that was the word that I felt fit me the most because to me, it just felt different. Um, and even as I'm saying it now, I'm like, it's still strange to me in a way to not connect with that word anymore. But queer, you know, it means other. And specifically in regards to LGBTQ identities, so sexuality and gender identity. Um, And so, yeah, by high school, I was dating girls, and would sort of explore my gender identity. At the beginning of our GSA meeting, we would gather in a circle. Everyone would say their name and their pronouns, and it was a space where people could explore and say a different name, different pronouns. And so sometimes I would try that out with just different pronouns. I never changed my name in high school. There were quite a few trans kids in my GSA. Um, and yeah, it was an interesting space. It was very supportive because many of us felt deeply, deeply alone, like I did. And we had a group chat, and it felt like we were constantly on mental health watch for each other. Sometimes, every now and then, we'd get a message in the chat: "So and so is contemplating suicide tonight. Can everyone please reach out, try and help them?" And so we would help them the best that we could, knowing that, just the way that I felt, that ultimately there was only so much we could do because their parents were responsible for them. And many of our parents maybe they didn't know how deeply we were struggling, and or they didn't know how to help, because again, I think it goes back to that same thing that I felt with my parents, which was that, you know, when I tried to express who I was and what I needed, it was met with this resistance. No, you can't be that. You can't be this. Just stop it. And it's like, well, that's not how that works. How can you help me get better if this is really wrong? If there's something wrong with me, how can you help me? How can you really, really help me? And in order to help somebody, you have to see them. You have to be there for them in all of who they are in that moment. And for many of us, I think that the identity aspect became both a comfort. It was comforting. It was like, okay, so now we're not the only people who are like this, who are different in some way. But it also could become an over attachment at times. I am this thing. And then, but it also, because we were so young, was very free. So you could change who you were. You could say you were this label one day. You could say you were this label another day. It could flow and move. And most of us didn't have access to any sort of real ability to change our life or change our circumstances. Although there were some people in my high school and in the GSA who were like already medically transitioning at that point. A couple um, people who were trans trans boys at that time, so female to male, which is what I was, but I didn't do it till later. So it was interesting. It was an interesting space, um, and very supportive. We helped each other when we really needed it. So I graduated high school. I graduated high school in 2016, and I was very happy about that because that meant that that freedom that I'd been waiting for was there. It had arrived, and yet it felt a little bit anticlimactic because there my parents were still telling me what to do, and I ended up deciding to go to a college in Washington D.C., even though it wasn't really where I wanted to go, but it's where I ended up. And so when I left for college, I told myself that I was never going to live in my parents' house again. And I didn't. I did go back to visit a couple times, but that was that. I said I was never coming back to live. I moved to DC. Um, I was, I was riding on the excitement of, going out on my own, which is what I'd wanted, but none of my mental health or physical health issues had been resolved whatsoever. So I was still not in a good place. And my first semester of college was very difficult for me. I spent a lot of time in bed. I was falling asleep in my classes. Uh, I got introduced to alcohol in large amounts for the first time and did not know how to responsibly handle that. Um, I found a new group of mostly queer identified people my age. friends. Began to explore more with my sexuality now that I had this freedom. So it was a mix of both excitement and exploration and freedom, and also still this deep looming depression inside of me that I was battling and still felt like I had no support for. I was able to see a therapist on campus for the first time ever. And I got like 6 free sessions. And I remember just going and just crying and crying and crying. And she introduced me to this concept called the emotion wheel, I think it is. So it has it's like a wheel with different labels for emotions. And she tried to get me to start to identify what I was feeling. If I can think about it now, I would say the feeling that I felt was hopelessness, a deep, deep hopelessness. And ultimately, the sessions ended. I ran out of the 6 sessions and it was over, and I was on my own again. And I had no support. I mean, I had my friends, but a lot of my friends were struggling in similar ways. It was good to not be alone, I will say that. But there was a limit on how much we could really help each other, right? We were all so young. So then by the start of my second semester, I had begun to explore this concept of being transgender. I don't know when it started. I mean, obviously, I was introduced to the concept pretty young in high school. I was already identifying as queer and, having queer relationships. But I know that it clicked for me by watching YouTubers. And I remember watching this one trans guy YouTuber, and he was talking about gender dysphoria. And I had this thought where I was like, gender dysphoria, body dysmorphia, these sound really similar. Are they connected? And I had struggled a lot with my body image issues, and I had found the word body dysmorphia, and I was like, okay, I have that because I look in the mirror and every time I see something different, and most of the time I don't like it. And I would, work out obsessively, eat very little, and just did not treat my body very kindly. And I just had this moment where I was like, oh, wait, am I trying to create a male physique with what I'm doing with my body by wanting to be thin or whatever? And perhaps that was part of it. I did feel inside of me that there was a boyish aspect to myself that had, along with everything else about myself that I felt was sort of not accepted or met with love when I tried to express myself as a child. There was an aspect of myself that was more masculine, more boyish. And maybe part of that too was this just wanting to be free, wanting to be able to do what I wanted to do, and felt that there were limitations on that because I was female. So, yeah. And when I was a kid, there was a time when I wanted to, when I told my parents I was a tomboy, and they said, no, you're not. And all I wanted from that was just to be acknowledged. I liked the word, and there was a boyish aspect to me. I did want to play baseball with the boys. I loved my brothers. I liked being outside and getting dirty in the mud. And all of those things are things that girls can do. And I did. And there was nothing wrong with that. All that I needed to be told was that, yes, you can. Yes, just yes, you are who you are, period. I wasn't even, when I was a child, I wasn't confused about being a girl at all. I just wanted to be free as a girl. And, I was a girl who became aware at a young age of inequality in a way. Like I was aware that there were differences, and I did feel in some way that that was not just. And so as I got older, like when I was in high school, I began to associate with being a feminist, and I felt very passionate about protecting women. And then, once I got into the transgender stuff, I lost that for a moment, in the same way that I lost myself. So it's very interesting how that happened. But, you know, up until I was 19, I was very passionate about women. I was like, women are amazing and we should be able to do what we want to do. And I was really, really into that. Um, but yeah, so I started watching these YouTubers and started making these connections in my head. And even though I had some space from my parents at this point, we didn't see each other regularly anymore. We would talk on the phone and catch up, but there was still this boiling anger inside of me at my parents. And I still felt that even though, I had gained my freedom, I had moved away from home, but my parents still controlled my life, or so I felt. Um, I didn't feel free from them. And there was a part of me that wanted to cut them out of my life completely. And I knew that I couldn't just say, "Hey, mom and dad, I need some space. Can you give me some space?" Because they had notoriously not respected my boundaries before. And also, I didn't really know how to assert such a boundary. I felt like a big deal. It was a big deal, right? So all these things compiled into me deciding that I wanted to transition, because I began to, after watching a lot of this stuff that was telling me that actually this is who I was, um, it also caused me to look back on those memories, like the ones I mentioned before, like, oh, I wanted to play baseball as a kid, that means I actually was a boy. Or, I cut my hair when I was 2 and I looked like my brother. That means I was actually a boy. And these sort of like stories that I began to tell myself that validated this belief that I was truly transgender, that it wasn't that I just wanted to be or wanted to explore this concept, but that I had actually been a boy all along, and that I was. And I don't know if I ever fully bought into the born in the wrong body ideology, but I bought into aspects of that because I truly convinced myself that I was meant to be a boy. And I started to tell other people that, and I created this story, and so it was. Um, so that beginning to feel true inside of me, coupled with the fact that I also wanted to figure out a way to never speak to my parents again, I devised a plan to transition, and I knew that my parents would not be cool with that. So it all sort of fell together. So I met a friend who was transitioning. We later ended up dating and sort of transitioned together. He started hormones before me, but we supported each other in that process. So in the spring of 2017, I started going by the name Max. I remember going to a lot of parties at that point. I remember drinking a lot, but I don't remember much else, to be honest. But I started going by that name, and that felt like one happy thing in my life. It felt like a good thing, something that I received a lot of praise and validation for. There was a lot of attention and focus on me. Oh, they're going by Max now. Okay, like, cool. What are you going through? It allowed me to sort of have a voice and have a story to tell. So I started taking testosterone on July 31st, 2017. I didn't tell my parents until 4 months later. I legally changed my name in November of 2017 to Maxwell. And I called my parents the next day and I told them everything. They had sort of already found out through family, I guess, and they were not pleased. They were very unhappy. By that point, my voice had already deepened. My body was already changing a lot. And I was really excited about a lot of it. It was this new thing to focus on, this new project. it gave me some sort of purpose when for so long I had been feeling like I was lacking in that. The validation from my peers and my friends gave me something that felt like love that I had also been missing for a long time. And getting to do something that I wanted to do helped me to feel that freedom that I'd also been longing for. So my parents were really unhappy with what I was doing. They were concerned about me. But I had already made up my mind. The reason that I called them and told them the day after I legally changed my name was because I didn't want them to stop me. And so it was too late for them to stop. And at the same time, I did set it up to be a sort of test, do my parents really love me? And I convinced myself that if they did not accept and validate who I was saying that I was, that they did not love me. And they failed the test as I had designed it to be. And we went back and forth over email for a couple of weeks. My parents would send me videos of people who had detransitioned and articles about the potential harms of hormone therapy. My mom sent me a list of memories of me as a child that were very, about how I was a girl, that I liked to play with dolls and I always liked fashion and musicals and things like that. But I was persistent. I sent them resources from PFLAG, the parents of LGBT youth organization. Told them that, all they had to do was just accept that I was actually their son and not their daughter, all this stuff. And finally, I set the boundary that I had been wanting to set. And I said, if you can't accept me for who I am, then you don't get to be in my life anymore. And I cut my parents out of my life. I was 20 years old. Yeah, I cut my parents out of my life. It was very painful, very emotional. I changed my number. I had to drop out of school because they were helping to pay for it. I moved in with a person that I was dating at the time. I was deeply hurt because of all of the hurt that had already happened. And then this on top of it felt like the final rejection of who I was, because I had truly conflated inside of myself this attachment to this new identity that I was a trans man, to being who I was, even though it wasn't. And so a rejection of this new identity that I had decided had always been my identity, or who I was, felt like the last rejection. So I was hurt, deeply hurt, because it was a lot of hurt on top of each other. So it felt like a heartbreak, losing finally the people that were supposed to love me my entire life, but it also was sort of my own design, right? I decided I wanted this. But I was so young, I didn't know what I was doing. And I know that I really hurt my family by doing that. And it's difficult because now, so I didn't speak to my parents for almost 6 years. Now they're back in my life. My dad and I have a really good relationship now, actually. And I know how much that hurt him. And so it's painful to think about sometimes and acknowledge that it was a hurtful action. And yet I can also acknowledge that I truly did need to go on my own path to find self-love and self-acceptance for who I truly am, which is simply me. It's not any identity, it's not any label, it's just love for who I am. So, it is what it is. It happened. I did that. One of the hardest parts about it was that my youngest sister was still young. She was probably in middle school at that point. And so cutting off my parents meant that I also had to end my relationship with her. And that was very painful. And yet also from that point on, I really just dissociated from it all. I just avoided thinking about it, and I tried to carry on with my life. So from then on, life went on. I began to just become an adult in the world. I got a full-time job with a salary and benefits by the later that in 2018. So I began to feel almost like I was ahead of my peers in a lot of ways. My transition was going well in the sense that I was looking like a man. People didn't know, after a short time, people didn't even know that I was trans, which I felt was a huge success. In June of 2018, I got a double mastectomy at 20 years old, completely voluntary. Looking back, I didn't know what I was doing, but I did it. And that taught me one of the greatest lessons about anger, which is that when you hold on to anger, it ultimately only burns yourself. But we'll come back around to that experience, because at that point in time, I was in it, and I had no concept that I would never not be in that experience. When I was living as trans, when I was living as Max, I was like, this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. I truly felt that that was who I was. No doubt about it, right? Like, I literally was deeply in it, and I lived my life that way. I lived my life as a man. Especially after the first year or two, things just got very simple. There was nothing left to do in regards to my transition. I looked like a man. People perceived me as a man. I, had relationships. I had a job. I went back to school. I finished my degree. And I was a Zumba instructor. But I was still struggling. I just did not necessarily, for a while, perceive myself to be, because I was so focused on these goals in my life. Relationships often, for me, were really big mirrors, where I was able to see myself and see the issues that I was struggling with attachment, with self-love, with identity. I was bisexual, so I would date men and women. And as I got further into my transition, I got involved in having a lot of sex with a lot of random people. And that was what I would say was a dark period of my life. I was also drinking a lot and smoking a lot of weed, and I was just trying to lose myself every way that I could. I began to realize after some time that this dark cloud of depression was still there. And every single morning I would wake up sad. I would wake up with just feeling like, literally, like there was a gray cloud above my head. No matter how sunny it was outside, it just felt like there was this looming pain inside of me. Not to mention that I still struggled with my physical health. I was still experiencing a lot of chronic pain and chronic fatigue. It would come and go, it was like ups and downs. So by 2022, I was like, in many ways, I felt very successful. I had gotten my own apartment for the first time. I got a cat. I was in a relationship with somebody. Life felt like I felt grown up a little bit, so at this point I would have been 20, 23 and 24. And it felt like, in a way, I had moved past that like survival period of my life where I was just trying to recover from what happened with my parents. I had gone through most of what I wanted to do with my transition, and I was just living as a man, and that was that. But that's when some deeper stuff really started to catch up with me. That's when I saw that dark cloud over my head and I saw that things were not any better. I was still deeply hurting inside. The relationship that I was in was a huge mirror for me at that time. I was dating a person who identified as non binary, who was also born female. And although they did not fully transition the way that I did, they did present very masculinely and um, I believe identified as trans. But when we were together, it just felt like we were two girls. Like it just felt this sort of familiarity, this comfort, this like, I see you and we can just be ourselves. And yet throughout the world, we walked around with these masks. And I guess on some level, I began to wonder why. Why do we do that? And they were someone I loved very much, and they were the first person I ever told that I regretted having top surgery. Um, and I can't believe I even said it that early on. Like it's crazy how the realization that transitioning was not the right path for me. Um, it came in waves over a long period of time, and I feel like that was sort of the beginning, was that realization um, that I regretted that decision. I cried while I told them, and it felt like this dark secret that I could not possibly share. So around that time, I started to begin what I consider my spiritual awakening, basically. I stopped drinking. I became sober. I quit my job and I decided I was going to be free and see what happened. I had some savings to rely on. And then I began to really I decided that I really wanted to get to the bottom of what was going on with my health, my overall health. I began to read more, study more about like holistic wellness, and I began to understand that the mind and the body are not disconnected, but they are one, and the mind, body, and spirit are also one, and that everything is connected. I began to learn about trauma. I read The Body Keeps the Score, which teaches that trauma is stored in the body and can cause physical pain. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. And just one thing led to another, that I began to just understand this larger picture, that there was more than just myself. I began to basically experience an expanding of my consciousness, I guess is what I would call it. And I began to follow things outside of myself and trust in some sort of unknowing, because I began to understand that I did not know everything, and that it was worth it to take some leaps of faith, because life was not serving me, or the choices that I had made were not serving me. I didn't know which ones yet, or at least was not willing or ready to face which specific decisions were not serving me at that time. But I followed the impulses that I felt to do different things to change my life. So, the first was that I decided I needed to leave DC. So I'd been living in DC for 6 years at that point. And it's interesting because once I embarked on this journey I said I was going on a healing journey, and began to experience this expansion of my awareness. I watched as my life fell apart. And other people who go through a spiritual awakening will sort of describe the same thing, where you get excited about this path, and it's that hope, it's that faith that sort of like pulls you through, as literally like everything just kind of collapses around you. But that's what I asked for. I said, even though at that time I wasn't really even thinking about God, I didn't really have a concept in my mind, although I was sort of like, I had a general like concept of faith, right? But I basically was like, just put a call out to the universe, which is what I would have said at the time. Just change my life, help me be better, help me find healing. And so God answered, and I lost my apartment. It was infested with mold. um, I gradually lost all my money. And then my relationship was not doing well. I knew I needed to get out of DC. And I had wanted to move out west for a long time. So I initially had wanted to go to LA because I thought I wanted to go to grad school and become a therapist. And at the time I was like, well, I don't have any money to do that, but I had some family in Las Vegas and I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Las Vegas. I never imagined myself moving to Las Vegas, but that's where I'm going to go. So I sold all my stuff, packed up my car, and drove across the country with my cat to Las Vegas in 2022. And before that, so July 31st of 2022 would have been my 5-year anniversary of starting testosterone. And by the time that date came around, I decided I wanted to stop. And again, I can't even, explain it except that it was a calling. It was a higher calling. I had no idea why I was stopping. On some level, I knew it was because I wanted my health to get better, and I felt, okay, I have to stop taking all the medications that I'm on, and that was one of them. But at one point in my life, maybe a couple of years earlier, I would not have been ready to let go of that medication. I would have said, "Oh, I need this one. This one is part of who I am, so I'm going to keep taking it." But I was finally ready to let go. And just to give you a picture of what I looked like at the time, I had a full beard and a mustache. I actually had grown my hair out really long, so it was about the same length as it is now, but it was curlier. And people would tell me I looked like Jesus a lot. I was a very beautiful man. I can say that, and I liked the way that I looked a lot, and other people said that they did too. So it sort of just inflated my ego a lot to look the way that I did. But around that time too, I had started to sort of explore my femininity again a little bit more. I was telling people they could call me any pronouns or whatever, and I was still going by Max, and I had no thoughts of even changing that, but I was at least just beginning to allow myself to change. By the time the 5-year anniversary came around, I decided I didn't need the hormones anymore. And I slowly, but probably not slowly enough, tapered myself off the hormones. I didn't follow a doctor. I also was in the process of moving anyways. So in September of 2022, I made my drive across the country to Las Vegas. And I moved in with some family, which also was a leap of faith for me, because I still wasn't speaking to my parents. It was my aunt and my cousin that lived here, and yeah, it was still nerve-wracking for me to even open myself up to them. But I'm grateful that they welcomed me here and are now a big part of my life. I think by the time I arrived, I was done with the hormones. I don't think I did any injections in Las Vegas. And a few weeks after I arrived, my 25th birthday came. And the day after my 25th birthday, my period came back for the first time in 5 years. And it felt like a beautiful birthday gift from my body, from God. It felt just so relieving. It felt like I was at home in my body again. And then my body continued to change. And I think because of the hormones readjusting, it really did a number on my mental health. And my first winter in Las Vegas was quite rough. Plus, even though I had let go of so much, I was still in that same relationship that I was in, the one that was a really beautiful and sometimes painful reflection of myself. We stayed in a long distance relationship until the following summer, actually. And that was very challenging. And I felt like it was like the final season of that really deep depression that I had been in for, honestly, over 10 years. I had been in that same deep depression, and it felt like that was the last one. And after that winter, I told myself, I'm never going through that again. The next winter will be better. I'm going to get better. And I did. And I have been getting better. Um, my body changing was challenging for me. I lost a lot of weight. A lot of the facial hair fell out. So by November of 2022, I shaved it. I saw my face again, and I was like, oh, I'm I'm pretty. But I still didn't know what I was going through in regards to my concept of self, because I had built up such an attachment to this identity of being trans that it was very difficult to let go, to the point where I wasn't even considering that that was what I was going through. The word detransition at that point had no I had no concept that that was what I was doing. And so at that point, people still perceived me as male, but some people would be a little bit confused because my features were softening. I got pretty skinny. I still had quite a bit of stubble, and things like that. But my hair was long. And after some time, I started to feel uncomfortable, that I wasn't being seen, but I didn't know how I wanted to be seen. I was just like, I guess I started to realize that I did want people to know that I was female. Because a lot of people thought, actually, at that point, and maybe sometimes still do, they thought that I was born male and that I was transitioning to female. And that's why I looked like this sort of androgynous person. And that made me uncomfortable. But I didn't know exactly why it made me uncomfortable. Um, so by the time the next summer came around, I'd been in Vegas for almost a year. I finally was feeling a little bit better. And that summer, I reconnected with my dad for the first time. I saw him, and it went well. It was nice to see him again. Um, it was emotional, but also felt very comfortable in many ways. And he began to be a supportive person in my life again, and I let him in. I let him in, and it turned out he had been trying to support me the entire time. He had been trying to be there for me, and I think my absence really, um, I taught him a lot. It taught us both a lot. We learned a lot through that process. Um, and then in August of 2022, um, I I went to go stay in South Carolina in a cabin by myself for a month, and it was my parents' cabin. I'd never been there before, but it had a bunch of stuff in it that I was familiar with. Like the kitchen was full of the pots and pans from our old house. Our childhood DVD collection was there, and um, I went there to do some deep introspection, and I still hadn't seen my mom again yet, but I felt her presence there. I felt myself there for the first time in a while, and I wrote a lot of poetry while I was there, and things started to come through me that my subconscious was expressing that I still wasn't ready to express myself. And you know what? I wanted to read some poetry, actually. Let me see if I have it pulled up. Yes. Okay. So while I was in this cabin in South Carolina, all this poetry started coming through me. And you know how like artists will say that like they didn't make the art, God used them as a vessel for the art. That is how I felt about this poetry, because even just looking at it now, I'm like, I don't remember like coming up with these words. It just flowed out of me. And so right before I left DC, I was sort of in the nightlife scene a little bit there, and I did some like go-go dancing and things like that. And I had come up with this sort of performer name for myself, which I also made my Instagram handle at the time, and it was the Max Fantasy. And I think it's funny that that was my final iteration of being Max, was I began to understand that it was a fantasy. And so I wrote this poem. This was in October. I guess this was after, maybe. This was after the South Carolina. I wrote this poem called Who is the Max Fantasy? Who is the Max Fantasy? The Max Fantasy is an illusion, all fire and smoke, fire and air, hardly even there. The Max Fantasy is a figment of your imagination and mine, created in my bedroom one night under the covers with a flashlight. The Max Fantasy goes into the box, comes out of the hat, gets chopped in half, appears and goes away again. He is, they are, a tightly wound ball, limbs bending in every position, expanding into the brightest light. They are, she is, sometimes, only rarely, to those allowed to see. Shimmering seduction, magic, is inside of her and flows out from her palms. The Max Fantasy is an apparition, never meant to be physical at all, delighted and pained by the challenge of existing corporeally. He hides under a cloak of invisibility, restoring energy for the next great change, taking inspiration from all the great plants and animals who are known to transform. The Max Fantasy is a myth, is a mystery, a gift, a present. The Max Fantasy is a rebel and is tired of fighting for causes and people not worth fighting for. The Max Fantasy is the greatest show on earth, name and bright shining lights. Feats of nature and beyond will occur. The Max Fantasy doesn't exist at all. It's a pipe dream. It's a burst of energy, a dream, a vision of beauty. So that poem came through me a little bit after my time in South Carolina. And yeah, while I was there, I was doing some doing a lot of introspection, and I got a big poster board, and I was like trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And in the center was me, but instead of writing my name, I just wrote the letter M. And then I wrote around it all these things that I associated with who I was as a person and what I liked to do and whatnot, but it was just the letter M. So that's what I mean when I say that it was waves of realization. You know, the fact that in that poem I even used the pronoun she was shocking to me, but I did. And so things were starting to come to my awareness. So I got back from South Carolina to Las Vegas, and finally I was feeling better. Like truly, I felt better. I felt refreshed, felt more focused. I was working for a flower shop at that time, and I just kind of got back to work. And I also began to really deepen into community at that time. Las Vegas has this amazing community here. There's a lot of people who come here to do some deep self-work, a lot of spiritual community here, spiritual kind of meaning here, a lot of different things. But people who are interested in like exploring deeper concepts of why we're all here, and what people who are willing to look within to do that. And so I'm grateful because throughout my whole journey, there's been a lot of people around me who've been able to support me on my path. And so in November of 2023, I was invited to sit in my first ayahuasca ceremony. And when I received that invitation, it was an immediate yes, even though I actually had not even met the person who sent the invitation. It was in a group chat, but it was just this immediate full body and soul yes. And I knew about ayahuasca, but I don't remember when I first heard about ayahuasca actually. But I knew that I wanted to do it, and I had no idea that I would ever be able to do it in a place where I already lived. I thought it was only in South America or something, that I'd have to have a lot of money and the ability to travel to go do it. But here it was, and someone was inviting me to go sit in a ceremony. Okay, yeah. And so for those who don't know, ayahuasca is a plant medicine. It's a sacrament that's consumed in a ceremonial setting for deeper connection to self, to God. So it comes from South America, and it's been maintained and passed on by tribes who have lived there for a long time, families. have passed on this medicine, and it's a very strong tea brewed from two different plants that are combined into a tea. You drink it, and it produces psychedelic effects. And ayahuasca is the name of the medicine, but it's also the name of the sort of entity that you feel that you're interacting with when you consume the medicine. And many describe her as a she because it feels like a feminine, very motherly or grandmotherly energy. It's a sort of like deeply, deeply ancient energy that reminds you of who you truly are, who God created you to be, that sort of soul essence that I've kind of been talking about this whole time that I've always felt was repressed. It helps you get back to that. It can help you heal from your traumas, help you face the darkest parts about yourself, and find love and forgiveness for yourself. And it's a beautiful, powerful medicine. And when I went to go sit in my first ceremony in Las Vegas with a church that practices and serves this sacrament here, I went to ask the medicine, why am I in so much pain? Because I had gone through so much at that point. And I was feeling a little bit better, but I was still in so much pain, both mental and physical. And I asked her in that ceremony, why am I in so much pain? And Grandmother Ayahuasca told me, as though she were my own grandmother, and we were sitting down by the fire, and I had come to ask her for some deep wisdom and guidance. And I asked her, why am I in so much pain? And she said to me, you're a woman. And it was this big moment, this big, oh, yeah, I am. Oh. And throughout that whole night, I was very vocal and I was yelling a lot. And I just kept saying, oh, oh, oh. Because that's what it was. It was just this big, oh, yeah. Like I was a woman this entire time. Um, but it was beautiful and it was devastating all at once because I had made all the right steps to get to that moment. I had stopped taking the hormones. I had reconnected with my family. I had let go of so much. I had let go of my entire life in DC that I created. I had ventured out to a new place where I barely knew anybody. I had started my life over again. And this was the last piece that had to fall of that life, that lie that I built for myself. I am a woman. And it was devastating because even though I had made so much progress, there was that attachment to that identity of being a man and of being trans was all ego based. It was all ego. And the ego does not like to fall. And so it was a beautiful ego death in that I was finally able to see the truth of it all. And what enabled me to see it with so much love and with so much clarity was that the medicine showed me this beautiful vision of myself as a woman. She showed me, um, she didn't show me my name yet because I was absolutely not ready to hear my name again yet. Maddie. I was not ready to hear that name. But she showed me the colors that I've always associated with my name. She reminded me that I'm purple and red are my colors, which I guess I'm kind of wearing purple and red right now. And she showed me this beautiful vision of myself with dark, long hair and like wearing beautiful clothing and all this stuff. And it was devastating and beautiful because I was worried. I truly thought that she might be showing me what I had missed out on because of the mistakes that I'd made, that it was impossible to ever be her again or to be her for the first time because I transitioned when I was 19. I never really got to become a woman. But she showed me this beautiful vision, and I cried and I screamed and I yelled that entire night. And anyone who was in that room, some people still remember. It was a beautiful, glorious, devastating moment of truth. And at the end of the night, there was a sharing circle where we all shared about what we just went through. And um, I didn't say my name because I didn't even know what to say. I was like, oh my God, what? Am I really going to do this? Because even though now it feels so easy, at the time I was like, I can't possibly tell everybody that I'm not really a man. I can't tell everybody who was in my community in DC that I'm letting go of that identity. I'm no longer trans. I'm just myself now. It felt, even though now it feels so simple to say that, it felt like, well, again, it was the ego, it was this attachment to this identity that I had developed that it was still hard to let go of, but I was willing to try. And so at the end of that night, I shared what some of my experience. I have no idea what I shared, but I didn't say any name because I didn't know what to say. And then I went to the bathroom and I looked in the mirror and my face was just red and streaked with tears from crying for like 6 hours. And there was a lot of stubble poking through on my face. And I just looked in the mirror, looked directly in my eyes, and I said, I'm here because I love myself. I'm here because I love myself. I felt like a mess. I felt shocked. I felt devastated. And I also felt this feeling of love and this feeling of faith that there was more. There was still more to this journey, the journey that I had set out on when I said to the universe, when I said to God, I want to heal. And God stripped away everything in my life to help me find the truth, led me to Las Vegas, led me to that moment where I was sitting in ceremony, screaming and yelling and rocking back and forth and just saying, oh, oh, oh. I'm here because I love myself. I'm here because I love myself. And that's why I'm here right now, too, sharing this story, because I have felt compelled to share my story for a long time. And I've been scared. This is scary to do because it's very vulnerable, and people, especially lately, especially these days, have a lot to say about trans stuff, transgender people, transgender whatnot. And well, there's a lot to say about it, right? I mean, it's complicated, you know. I think I can only speak on my own experience, but I do have a lot of theories that I can share and stuff about what this experience truly is. I think that a lot of people who end up connecting to the trans identity are people who are highly intelligent, first of all, people who are also highly sensitive, people who feel things very deeply, and people who have a strong desire and need to be free and to be seen for who they are. And this, the trans identity is one that you can easily attach to because it helps to solve a lot of those problems in the short term. You think it's going to help you feel freer. It's going to help you feel more seen because and then your ego attaches to this and says, oh, this is actually who I am. So I'm going to do this. And I think people too who get into it are also people who have been hurt, who have been really deeply hurt. And, um, people say hurt people hurt people. Hurt people also hurt themselves. One of the hardest things that has come from this has been acceptance of the double mastectomy. How can I possibly ever come to peace with that? And I in that ceremony, I think that was honestly, I don't think that was even a big part of it. I was more so like, I just felt that the way that I looked in the mirror was so far from what the vision of what ayahuasca showed me of what I could look like. And it took me some time to realize that the vision that she showed me was not of what I missed out on, but who I am going to be. And I can already see myself now and see that, oh, I am her, I am that vision of myself. Um, it hasn't been that long, and already I've gone through so much. So that was November of 2023. I went back for a second night of ceremony. Usually you sit at least 2 nights in ceremony, and the second night can kind of help you to gain some even a greater sense of clarity and peace. And it did just that, because after the first night, I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to tell people? Just what? Like, oh my God. Because truly, even though, like I said, I had done so much to get there, I still truly was shocked. I was not expecting that that was where my life was going to lead me. Because as I said, it was this attachment to identity that the ego had latched onto, and it was still clinging on a little bit. It certainly was still clinging on. But I came back the second night, and I don't remember the second night as clearly, but I left with this clarity that just just let it go and just let it flow, and what's meant to happen is going to happen, and everything's going to be okay. And so within a few days, I was telling my group of friends, and some of them didn't even know that I was trans. So like some of my friends just thought I was a man, like born a man. And it was very freeing to tell people and to finally let that go, and to allow myself to be seen, even though it was painfully vulnerable, to do that. And so within a couple months, I started getting laser hair removal on my face. I continued to sit in ceremony quite a few more times, because I felt that there was a lot more work to do. There was a lot more to delve into, um, and I know that there's still more work yet to be done. For example, I know that there's that anger that I've described feeling at my parents. I know that I haven't even fully delved into that, and I personally really love plant medicine, because it gives one the ability to delve into those deep parts of the psyche of our experience, and really fully feel the depths of what we are capable of feeling as human beings. I think that that's one of our gifts. I think that's one of the reasons that our souls decide to come to earth and incarnate in a human body and have a human experience, is to feel. We have such great capacity to feel. And we get scared of how much we feel. We get scared of our pain. We get scared of our grief. We get scared of it all. And it's so freeing to just let it all go and just find love and acceptance for all that it is. And that is what this journey has been about a lot for me, because I could choose to judge myself. I could choose to judge others for this journey. But as I think I said before, when I when I try to come to find acceptance for, cutting my parents out of my life, which I know was very painful for them, and for my family, for my sister, for me, I do accept that I did have to go on my own path. And I am someone who, for better or for worse, needed to experience this for myself, um, so that I could learn the lessons, of this painful experience of losing myself and coming back to myself. I don't know that I would have developed this level of self love that I have now if it weren't for this experience that I've had. And so I'm beyond grateful for it. I'm beyond grateful for the journey. I'm beyond grateful for the pain, for the lessons, for the hurt, for the love, for every single relationship that I've ever had, for every single person who has loved me, for who I am every single step of the way, for the way that each person has loved me, the way that they know how to love me. And I'm so, so grateful for the love that I've found for myself. At the same time, I do feel that I did go on this journey to share my story with others and to help others perhaps maybe avoid some of the pain that I've gone through by sharing my story. So, although a lot of people, who go through this, who detransition, many people who are public about their stories decide to, take a more political route and lobby against, like, transitioning for minors and things like that, which I think is a very, very noble cause and very admirable. It's not really where I feel my energy is called. I feel that I am here to help those who are deeply struggling the way that I was. So Um, if my story resonates with you at all, you are welcome to reach out to my email or to my Instagram, I suppose. This is new, so I'm figuring it out. I also am going to be interviewing other people on this platform. So, uh, if you're someone who has a powerful message to share, one of love and truth and acceptance, please also feel free to reach out to me via email would be the best. Um, so I do feel that this story is wrapping up for now. There's actually a lot more, so I think what I'll do is I'll do a second part. But this is the journey of how I found myself here. I will say one more piece, which is that I didn't reclaim my name until April of last year. So it actually hasn't even been a year that I've been going by Maddie again. But Maddie is my name. It was always my name. I literally just put it in a little box and I tucked it away. And then I brought it back, and here it is. And here I am. So I'd like to tell that story at another time. And I'd also like to tell the story of getting laser hair removal and what the process of detransitioning has actually been like for me, which has been, I mean, it's been really beautiful. It's been like this for the past year or so. It's just been this like celebration of who I am. I get to be me. I get to be myself again, like truly, fully. I get to be myself for the first time ever because I'm realizing and learning and accepting that I've actually been free the whole time. And when I operate from a place of knowing that I am free, I no longer make choices to try to prove something, prove anything to anybody. I just get to be me, and I get to really think about what I want, and also what does God want for me? What is my purpose here on this earth? Why am I here? And I get to operate from that place, which is a place of much more love rather than a place of anger or hurt. I can let that hurt go. I can do my work to go, you know, into meditation or sit with some plant medicine and really feel that hurt and learn from it, because our pain is one of our greatest teachers. Um, but I don't have to live my life in that hurt. I have a choice in that, and I choose love. So, wow, this feels really good, actually. I was certainly nervous to record this, but this feels actually pretty solid. So, wow, I am so grateful to to I am so grateful to have released this off of my chest. And I'm grateful to you for listening. If you're here right now, thank you so much. And I look forward to sharing more on this platform. Um, yeah, once again, my name is Maddie, and thank you for joining me across the bridge. I will see you next time. Bye.